What's up, folks? I want to talk about Ravenous Passions, the Rage Casting Helmet. This was introduced in this patch and allows us to take our Rage and convert it to a caster variant rather than the normal attack speed and attack damage. We get cast speed and spell damage. This means that at the beginning of a map we do have a bit of a ramp up time as we spool up our Rage, and this was something that I knew that was going into it, but it does have some annoyances to it. If you need to make a trade, you're always respooling. If you end up dying, you're always respooling. This is something to think about when you're going into this build and what it's going to mean for you, as your flow of mapping is going to be a bit weird and how it starts. But once you have your Rage, once you have that cast speed, once you have that spell damage, you're pretty much good to go. You're going to be zipping through. If you're using something like Frostblink of Wintry Blast, really quickly you can cast around, zip around, and not have any problems with that. And then of course your damage is going to be very quick, because even if you have something like Spell Echo in your links, you're going to be casting so quickly that you're not going to notice it, and it feels pretty dang good overall as a caster setup to utilize. But you do have that spool up for Rage, so it's just something to think about. For the skill, I ended up going with Purifying Flame of Revelations. This is the transfigured version of Purifying Flame that makes it so you deal damage with the shockwaves rather than the initial impact of Purifying Flame. And it kind of it's stronger, but it's very finicky to use. I'm not going to say this is the best way to do it. I'm thinking like normal Purifying Flame would be very good. EK could be very good. Anything that has a fizz base is really going to work with the Berserker setup the best, because I wanted to use Berserker for Rite of Ruin. That's kind of how I had to think about that synergy, and I just ended up going with Purifying Flame of Revelations. But overall, the build is very fun in terms of what it does. I tried to do some interesting things with defenses to try to kind of fight back against being Aspect of Carnage, and I would say it worked out for the most part. I would say this can do everything for normal content, but T17s, Ubers, I'm not saying that this would be a good variant for that. I think tweaks would be required. Different ways of building, different ways of looking at the gearing, getting in more HP, maybe some repathing, or a different way of doing defenses. I've seen some people do Mahawk Swaddle with this setup, and I think that might be a little bit better of an idea, but we'll get into that later on in the video. First, let's just talk about Purifying Flame of Revelations, which is the skill I'm using and why it's a little bit weird for those of you who are interested. When you click normal Purifying Flame, you do damage with the hit impact here that you're seeing, and the shockwaves are kind of secondary. This is reverse of that. So you want to click on the enemy once, and then you want to click over here, and the shockwave itself is going to be doing 110% more damage. So you never want to directly hit something with it. That's why you'll see me casting kind of off the enemy like this and hitting with that shockwave. Now, if you have Bottled Faith, if you have things that create Conk Ground like Zealotry or something like that, you only need to do that once, and then the shockwave will propagate itself as you walk around doing this, and your damage will be coming from those shockwaves all around you. You just got to make sure you're not hitting with this initial impact. So it's a bit weird, and that's why you're seeing me do what I was doing in the video against Phoenix. So there we scale that up with like things like Empower, Awaken Fire Damage, the normal ways of scaling our physical skill gym. But the main focus of the build, of course, is the Ravenous Passions. Ravenous Passions takes your attack speed and attack damage and makes them cast speed and spell damage that you would gain from Rage. Combine Ravenous Passions with Rite of Ruin, and you got yourself triple effect of your Rage for your casting. Like I said, it does take that spool up time. So if you look at how fast I'm frostblinking now, this is just me going around, and then if we spool this thing up by holding down right click and spending that mana, we'll see our Rage go up slowly but surely, and then as we get more into it, it spools up faster because we're casting faster, and we'll hit that at 80 Rage right there, and then we can just do this. Like, we are way quicker now as a result of that, and it feels really good to play the build. The reason that I have to spool up so far is because I had to lower the cost of my Purifying Flame down a lot to be able to cast it on the mana that I have. Because of the option in my UI to hide mana on life reservations, I have very little mana there actually to spend, and so I had to figure out a way to lower the cost. but not lower it so far that I couldn't generate rage, and that was kind of a weird balancing act with that. But you'll notice that even though I am Ravenous Passions and I am Rite of Ruin, I'm not stacking rage that heavily. I don't have berserking, I don't have rage axes. I do have Bear's Girdle, but I didn't go super far into stacking it because it's kind of a balancing act. You can't really go too far into rage because one, the cost starts going up a lot, and your tree pathing gets really weird because you don't really use a lot of the extra stuff that comes with some of these nodes, and you give up things like plus to skill gems and easier crafting of your weapons. So I ended up going with normal weapons and not going into all the rage nodes, just enough to get Rite of Ruin, Bear's Girdle, and a little bit of that good rage scaling from that to try to kind of balance out the character's defenses. Bear's Girdle was very, very good for this build because 20 rage when combined with Rite of Ruin and that 6% increased physical per 10 rage means that we have 80 rage. We get the 6% in physical for our physical base skill gem, along with Bear's Girdle and Flawless Savagery. That all adds up really, really well, and that's why I wanted to do a fizz-based skill gem to be able to get as much scaling out of it as possible, and that combo works really, really well. You'll see multiple people doing it. That's why Purifying Flame of Revelations was chosen, but like I said, EK, maybe any other fizz-based skill, they could all probably work very well, and you just have different ways of building them, and some of them are probably more defensive than others as well, so something to keep in mind. From there, we got the normal scaling that you would do. For this, I'm converting it all to fire with Avatar of Fire, and then I'm doing Awakened Fire Penetration, Spell Echo, and crit damage because we are crit based off of a leadership's price. And that kind of leads into how I did defenses for this build, which is kind of a weird way that was suggested, and I wanted to explore it as a result of that. So I've actually stolen, with Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh, Cleansing Waters from Chieftain. Now, a lot of people don't steal Cleansing Waters. This is the modifiers to fire resist also apply to cold and lightning resist at 50% of their value. The reason I did this is because that allowed me to just get fire and chaos resist on all of my gear, get myself a massive amount of fire resist, so now I have 85 all resist from the fact that I am also melding a flesh. Where is my melding of flesh? There it is. When I pop a Ruby Flask, I go up to 90 all resist, 334 fire resist, and I am spec'd into the fire node up here for regen 1 life per second for each uncapped fire resist. So this is giving me that massive life regen that I have, 1500 normally, and then you'll see it go up to 4500 whenever Enduring Cry gets popped off. So the reason I went that is because it allowed me to just stack fire resist, not worry about any other resistances on my gear besides chaos resist, and get myself all my resistances, and then also go for that max resist by using Melding of Flesh, things like Purity of Fire, all the combined. It was a very interesting way of doing resistances. It gave this character a lot more girth, and as a result of being able to go Cloak of Flame for fizz taken as fire damage, I got some of that physical mitigation into the build from this setup as well. So all of that combined was actually kind of a cool way to build a character. It's a new way for me, and it was very fun to explore, and I did enjoy it quite considerably. From there, what the other thing we do is you're also seeing that I have endurance charges popping off all the time, and I have this war cry going off non-stop. That's from the new Call to Arms support. So we have, where did I put Call to Arms? We have Call to Arms, Enduring Cry, and Increased Duration. The reason we do this is because we are stacking the War Cry cooldown recovery rates. So the buff, not the regen buff, but the buff that comes from Enduring Cry for physical damage reductions per endurance charge, we get that constantly. That never goes away because we're triggering it fast enough that we have a 3-second buff and a 2.64 cooldown. So it constantly goes off non-stop. The other thing that that's allowing us to do is also constantly have Onslaught because of the fact that we comboed that with Lead by Example. So every 4 seconds, if we War Cry, we get Onslaught. So by comboing this together, we get Onslaught, we get the Fizz mitigations, and we get the generation of our endurance charges alongside of Mob Mentality. So when we're near bosses, we also get our Frenzy and Power charges. So combine that with the Charge Mastery for increased duration, we basically can keep our Frenzy, Endurance, and Power charges up at all times when we're near bosses. And it's a very cool combo to use. Lead by Example, Mob Mentality, grab the nodes here, and then stack those War Warcry cooldown recovery rate tattoos alongside of a call to arms, and you got yourself a very powerful setup for defenses, offenses, charge generation, you name it, it all works very well together there. So that was a very cool thing to kind of add into the build and see what we could do with it, see if it could be utilized to a great effect, and I would say it did. I think it did very well for this build. Like I said, defensively, it looks good on paper. It looks, we got 90 all resist with the Ruby Flask. We got that Fizz to Fire from there. We got a little bit more Fizz to Fire from this one. I think I got it somewhere. Fizz Extra Fire. Fizz Extra Fire. Fizz taking us fire. So we got 45% of physical damage from hits taking us fire, which is pretty dang good for defensive layers alongside of those endurance charges, alongside of Enduring Cry. I just didn't end up with as much HP as I would have liked to give myself that buffer for tier 17s. Maybe just dropping Purified Blood is the play, and then we go up to 3000 HP, and then maybe figure out how to move my auras or back into my life pool, you know, clarity and vitality, and who knows. There's probably ways to modify this build to make it better, feel better, all that stuff. Didn't end up getting low life in this build like I was hoping to, so probably not worth it in the end to go Petrified Blood. Hey, yeah, you gotta give everything a try to see how it works out. From there, most of the gearing is pretty much your standard, what you would always have in a build like this. Like I said, life regen, chaos resist, fire resist, life regen, chaos resist, fire resist, life, movement speed. Rings are just minus mana cost to be able to get that mana cost down enough that I can cast at the full speed, because I do cast very quickly. Had to get a lot of minus mana cost in the build from there. And then we just got, you know, fire resist, bit of mana regen, fire resist, chaos resist, mana regen. Very basic stuff in terms of rings. The rings don't have any damage on them that I can speak of. Went leadership's price because of plus fire resist. Leadership's price was very cheap and allows us to use that melting of flesh to get ourselves up to those 85, 90 all resist layers, and then got a little bit of fire leech on the Ravenous Passions because we are doing purely fire damage from Avatar Fire. And then my scepter was just a basic one that I purchased that had some stuff on it that was good for me. Bought it in there. Could have probably got some crit multi and all this stuff, got more spell levels. Could have really pushed the build a lot further, but I ended up leaving it here because I had other ideas I wanted to explore. And then, of course, you know, graveyard crafting yourself a shield with life, fire skills, fire damage, crit strikes, fire resist, for maximum fire resist. That's just run-of-the-mill stuff in graveyard crafting days. It was a 1 in 3 for me to land this one, and I landed it on the first try. It's very nice. It's very cool. I saw someone list the same exact shield on trade for 10 divines. So it's a weird league for crafting as to what you're doing with it, what you can do with it. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, I'm sure there's plenty of videos on how to craft whatever you're looking to craft. Graveyard crafting is pretty crazy. You definitely explore some of that. I will say right now, the price of melting of flesh is through the roof. So I don't know if this is a viable option for making defenses currently. This perfect one that I have that I divine myself. You want to see the saga of that? It's on the Shorts channel. This is like 25 divines right now. I'm probably gonna sell this because I'd rather have 25 divines and just buy a lower one, because I have so much overcap resist. I don't care if this is like a minus 75. It doesn't matter to me on that front at all. From there, you know, Lethal Pride doing the Fizz Fire, Fizz extras, and we've got, of course, a Watcher's Eye for some minus mana cost, a bit more regen, and a bit more crit strikes on Conk Ground. Alongside of Brittle, we're pretty much capped. Those of you who don't know, the way that leadership's price works is you get Conflux. Conflux means that all your damage can cause all 3 of the alternate elements. So it's a very easy way to get both Brittle, Sapping, and Scorching into a build. I don't know why I was hovering automation. So very great way to do it, especially if you're doing Melting of Flesh, because you only need +3 to whatever you're stacking. So if you're doing Aegis Auras, you get Cold. If you're doing Purity of Fire and this kind of stuff, you get Fire, and so on and so forth. Leadership's price is extremely good, extremely powerful, and if you need alt elements, it's one of the easiest ways to get them onto all builds with all things. Sorry, my voice is like really shot today, but I wanted to get this video out to cover this build. So other than that, I think if I really wanted to reapproach this character, redo it again, I did see someone who had a variant that was going Mohawk Swaddle's Machinations and was able to do the same setup, very similar to it. but also get spell suppress into the build, and that would be a very, very tanky variant of the build, I would say, with about the same amount of damage. So definitely would go about and search for a variant like that if you're really interested in seeing how you could make a tanky Berserker. And then the other thing I would do is just kind of min-max the gear a little bit more, get a bit more HP, see if I could drop off Petrified Blood, because maybe it's just not worth it overall. And yeah, it's a very fun build. It's a very interesting way to build this rage zerking setup, and the biggest issue with it is that wind up. You know, if you die, you gotta wind up. If you enter a map, you gotta wind up. If you get a trade, you gotta wind up. If you're doing delve between nodes, you gotta wind up. There's a lot of wind up to it. I didn't go berserking in this setup, for those of you wondering. Where is it? Berserk? How do you spell berserk? Where is it? Yeah, I didn't go berserk because it's more attack speed and more movement speed with less damage taken, and the first two lines don't really help me. The less taken is good, but because of the fact that my mana cost is not that high, I don't generate rage fast enough to sustain berserk in a way that like makes sense for the build. So I ended up not going it. I've seen the Archmage versions of this build. They go berserk, they can sustain it, it looks very cool. My version can't do that. So if you're looking for that kind of setup, definitely go look at the Archmage setups, Hierophant setups, things like that. They'll do berserking, and they'll probably have another defensive layer from that on top of all the other things that they have going on as well. So just a different way of approaching the build, interesting way of using the mob mentality with the war cries. Wanted to check out Purifying Flame of Revelations. It's very fun. It's very weird to play. And overall, I'm happy with the build, but I wish I could have figured out a little bit more to it so that I could take it against T17s and really feel comfortable there. It's just a little lacking right now, even though on paper it looks decently good. So that's all for the build. If you got any questions, do leave them in the comments below. I'll leave the pub in there as well. And yeah, I'm gonna probably do a video on the update of Katabasis soon, because I min-maxed that character all the way, and that thing is smooth. So be on the lookout for that, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.